So my provocative statement is that we desperately need a serious scientific theory of cities, and scientific theory means quantifiable, relying on underlying generic principles that can be put into a predictive framework. That's the quest. Is that conceivable? Are there universal kind of laws? So is that just another version of this? Well, we understand this very well. That is, you ask any generic question about this: how many trees of a given size, how many branches of a given size does a tree have, how many leaves, what is the energy flowing through each branch, what is the size of the canopy, what is its growth, what is its mortality. We have a mathematical framework based on generic universal principles that can answer those questions, and the idea is, can we do the same for this? Okay. Let's talk about biology. This is explicitly showing you how things scale. And this is a truly remarkable graph. What is plotted here is metabolic rate, how much energy you need per day to stay alive, versus your weight, your mass, for all of us, a bunch of organisms. And it's plotted in this funny way of going up by factors of 10, otherwise you couldn't get everything on the graph. And what you see if you plot it in this slightly curious way is that everybody lies on the same line. Despite the fact that this is the most complex and diverse system in the universe, there's an extraordinary simplicity being expressed by this. It's particularly astonishing because each one of these organisms, each subsystem, each cell type, each gene has evolved in its own unique environmental niche with its own unique history. And yet, despite all of that Darwinian evolution and natural selection, they've been constrained to lie on a line. Something else is going on. Before I talk about that, I've written down at the bottom there the slope of this curve, this straight line. It's 3/4, roughly, which is less than 1, and we call that sublinear. And here's the point of that. It says that if it were linear, steeper slope, then doubling the size, you would require double the amount of energy. But it's sublinear, and what that translates into is that if you double the size of the organism, you actually only need 75% more energy. So a wonderful thing about all of biology is that it expresses an extraordinary economy of scale. The bigger you are, systematically, according to very well-defined rules, less energy per capita. Now, any physiological variable you can think of, any life history event you can think of, if you plot it this way, looks like this. There is an extraordinary regularity, so you tell me the size of a mammal, I can tell you at the 90% level everything about it, in terms of its physiology, life history, etc. And the reason for this is because of networks. All of life is controlled by networks, from the intracellular through the multicellular to the ecosystem level, and you're very familiar with these networks. That's a little thing that lives inside an elephant, and here's the summary of what I'm saying. If you take those networks, this idea of networks, and you apply universal principles, mathematizable universal principles, all of these scalings and all of these constraints follow, including the description of the forest, the description of your circulatory system, the description within cells. One of the things I did not stress in that introduction was that systematically the pace of life decreases as you get bigger. Heart rates are slower, you live longer, diffusion of oxygen and resources across membranes is slower, etc. Question is any of this true for cities and companies? So, is London a scaled-up Birmingham, which is a scaled-up Brighton, etc., etc.? Is New York a scaled-up San Francisco, which is a scaled-up Santa Fe? Don't know, we will discuss that, but they are networks. And the most important network of cities is you. Cities are just a physical manifestation of your interactions, our interactions, and the clustering and grouping of individuals. Here's just a symbolic picture of that. And here's scaling of cities. This shows that in this very simple example, which happens to be a mundane example of number of petrol stations as a function of size plotted in the same way as the biology, you see exactly the same kind of thing. There is a scaling. That is that the number of petrol stations in a city is now given to you when you tell me its size. The slope of that is less than linear. There is an economy of scale, less petrol stations per capita, the bigger you are, not surprising. But here's what's surprising. It scales in the same way everywhere. This is just European countries, but you do it in Japan or China or Colombia. Always the same, with the same kind of economy of scale to the same degree, and any infrastructure you look at, whether it's the length of roads, length of electrical lines, anything you look at has the same economy of scale, scaling in the same way. It's an integrated system that has evolved despite all the planning and so on. But even more surprising is if you look at socioeconomic quantities, quantities that have no analog in biology, that have more evolved when we started forming communities 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. The top one is wages as a function of size, plotted in the same way, and the bottom one is you lot, super creatives, plotted in the same way. And what you see is a scaling phenomenon, but most important in this, the exponent, the analog to that 3/4 for the metabolic rate, is bigger than 1. It's about 1.15 to 1.2. Here it is, which says that the bigger you are, the more you have per capita, unlike biology. Higher wages, more super creative people per capita as you get bigger, more patents per capita, more crime per capita, and we've looked at everything, more AIDS cases, flu, etc. And here, they're all plotted together. Just to show you, what we plotted here is income, GDP of the city, crime and patents all on one graph, and you can see they all follow the same line. And here's the statement: if you double the size of a city from 100,000 to 200,000, from 1 million to 2 million, 10 to 20 million, doesn't matter, then systematically you get a 15% increase in wages, wealth, number of AIDS cases, number of police, anything you can think of. It goes up by 15%, and you have a 15% savings on the infrastructure. This, no doubt, is the reason why 1 million people a week are gathering in cities, because they think that all those wonderful things like creative people, wealth, income is what attracts them, forgetting about the ugly and the bad. What is the reason for this? Well, I don't have time to tell you about all the mathematics, but underlying this is the social networks, because this is a universal phenomenon. This 15% rule is true no matter where you are on the planet. Japan, Chile, Portugal, Scotland, doesn't matter. Always, all the data shows it's the same. Despite the fact that these cities have evolved independently, something universal is going on. The universality, to repeat, is us, that we are the city, and it is our interactions and the clustering of those interactions. So there